There is a train that can kill 100 million people. Looks like a refrigerator car. It runs on public tracks. It stops at civilian stations. For 20 years, it rolled past school children, grandmothers, and factory workers. No one knew what it was. The Americans spent billions trying to find it. Satellites, spy planes, defectors, they failed. This is the weapon that almost made nuclear war survivable for one side. Let me show you what it felt like to stand next to it. Without knowing. February 1986, Novosibirsk. You are a passenger standing on a railway platform. The air is so cold it burns your lungs. You're waiting for the express train to Moscow, stamping your feet to stay warm. The station is quiet. Then you feel a vibration in your boots. The tea in your thermos ripples. Out of the darkness, a train approaches, but it's not yours. It's a freight train. Massive, heavy. It moves with a strange, smooth weight different from the coal trains you see every day. Clack-clack, clack-clack. You glance at the cars as they pass. Standard refrigerator wagons, the kind that carry frozen fish from Vladivostok. Refrigerated transit is stenciled on the side in fading Cyrillic paint. Nothing special. You watch it disappear into the blizzard, taillights fading like dying embers. You take a sip of your tea, you don't give it a second thought. Just another supply run for the motherland. What you don't know, what you cannot know, is that you just stood 10 feet away from the apocalypse. That wasn't a food shipment. Behind those false walls and painted windows was a crew of 70 men, watching you through hidden cameras, holding their breath. And resting on hydraulic stabilizers, aimed at the sky, was an RT-23 Molodets intercontinental ballistic missile.
10 nuclear warheads, each one 30 times more powerful than Hiroshima. That single train carried enough firepower to erase the entire eastern seaboard. New York, Washington, Boston, Philadelphia, gone.
And as you finish your tea, it vanishes into the forest. Untracked, unseen, unstoppable. For the next 3 weeks, 70 men will live inside that weapon. They will eat, sleep, and wait for an order that might end the world. They called themselves the Grooms. We'll meet them soon. But first, you need to understand why the Soviet Union was desperate enough to build a rolling apocalypse. 1976, a Soviet general sits in his office in Moscow. On his desk is a photograph, get black and white, grainy. It shows a patch of Siberian forest from above a bird's eye view. In the center of the photograph is a small square of concrete. It's missile silo, the one he thought was hidden. The one that took 3 years to build in secret. The coordinates are written in the corner. American handwriting. This photograph was recovered from a crashed CIA drone. The Americans had been watching the entire time. They knew where his missiles slept. That general understood something in that moment. His silo wasn't a weapon. It was a coffin. American spy satellites, the KH-11 Keyhole series, could read a license plate from orbit. They circled the Earth every 90 minutes, photographing every square inch of Soviet territory. You couldn't hide concrete from space. You couldn't hide construction trucks. You couldn't hide the roads that led to your bunkers. By the time a Soviet silo was finished, the Pentagon had its coordinates programmed into a Minuteman III in North Dakota. First strike targets. Priority 1. In a nuclear war, those silos would die in the first 15 minutes. Use them or lose them. That was the math. The Soviets needed to break the equation. They needed a weapon that couldn't be photographed. A weapon that didn't exist on any map. They needed a ghost. They looked at their submarines first. Submarines moved. Submarines hid under the ocean where satellites couldn't see. But submarines had problems. You can't communicate with a submarine when it's deep underwater. Radio waves don't penetrate the ocean. And if the Americans tracked a sub leaving harbor, followed it with sonar nets and attacked submarines, it was vulnerable. The Soviet admirals shook their heads. Not good enough. So the engineers tried something else. They stopped looking at the ocean. They looked at a map of their own country. The Soviet Union was a monster. 11 time zones. It's the largest nation in human history. And holding this giant together was the Soviet railway network. 87,000 miles of track. Through forests so dense you couldn't see the sky. Through mountain tunnels that stretched for miles. through cities, deserts, and frozen tundra where the temperature dropped to -50. At any given moment, thousands of trains moved across this web. Coal trains, passenger trains, timber trains, cars, military transports, a haystack the size of a continent. And the engineers realized something beautiful. If they could make a nuclear missile look like an ordinary freight car and throw it into this haystack, the Americans would spend eternity looking for a needle that was always moving. The math reversed. To kill the silos, America needed 1,000 warheads. It's expensive, but doable. To kill the trains, they would have to nuke the entire Soviet railway grid. Every tunnel, every bridge, restation from Leningrad to Vladivostok. 87,000 miles of targets? Impossible. The idea was approved. The project was codenamed BZhRK BZhRK Complex. Combat Railway Missile Complex. NATO would later call it the SS-24 Scalpel. The engineers called it something else. The Ghost Train. Having a brilliant idea is one thing, building it is another. Because as the engineers at the Yuzhnoye Design Bureau discovered, trains are not designed to launch spaceships, and nuclear missiles are very, very heavy. Picture the problem. Standard Soviet freight car carries maybe 60 tons. That's its limit. Push beyond that, and you start destroying the track beneath you. The RT-23 missile they wanted to use weighed 104 tons, just the missile. Now, add the launch tube reinforced steel, 15 meters long. Add the hydraulic lifting arm, the targeting computers, the generators, the radiation shielding. You're looking at nearly 200 tons. On a single train car, if you put that on standard wheels, the axles would buckle, the rails would deform. You'd leave a trail of twisted metal that satellites could see from space. Might as well paint a target on the roof. But that was just the first problem. The second problem was the wires. Most Soviet main lines were electrified. Voltage contact wires, 25,000 volts ran above the tracks, about 6 meters in the air. Fine for a train, fatal for a missile launch. The third problem was fire. A rocket engine burns at 3,000 degrees. If you ignite it inside a train car, you melt the car, melt the track. You weld the wheels to the rails. You get one shot. Then you're a sitting duck. The engineers weren't solving one problem. They were solving 3 impossible problems at once. While keeping the whole thing secret, while making it look like a refrigerator car, they almost quit. Then they got creative. They redesigned the wheels. A standard freight car has 2 bogies, wheel assemblies with 4 wheels each. The missile car had 8 bogies, 32 wheels, spreading the load across twice the length of track. But this created a new problem. A rigid 202 car can't turn corners. It would derail on the first curve. So they made it flexible. The missile wagon was actually 3 segments connected by articulated joints. It could snake around curves like a centipede, then lock rigid when it was time to stop. So from the outside, it looked like 3 ordinary freight cars coupled together. The inside, it was a single weapon. They couldn't ask the railway ministry to cut power every time they launched. That would alert spies. So they built a device that sounds like science fiction. Before launch, mechanical arms would extend from the sides of the train car. These arms would grab the high-voltage wires while wearing insulated clamps and physically shove them aside. At the same time, grounding cables would deploy, dumping the current safely into the earth. In 12 seconds, the airspace above the train was clear. A corridor for the missile to rise through. They used a technology called cold launch. When the captain turned the key, the main engines didn't ignite. Instead, a massive powder charge like a giant shotgun shell detonated beneath the missile. The 100-ton missile was thrown out of the tube like a cork from a champagne bottle. It rose 30 meters into the air, above the train, above the wires, hovering for a split second in the sky. Only then in midair did the main engines ignite. The flame deflectors on the roof shoved the exhaust sideways. The train rocked. Windows shattered in nearby buildings, dust swirled. But the train survived. It could move, reload, fire again. By 1987, the first ghost train entered service. A mobile nuclear launch platform, disguised as frozen fish. It was insane, it was brilliant, and it needed a crew. Let me introduce you to Lieutenant Dmitri. He is 22 years old. He has never seen combat. He has a degree in electrical engineering from a polytechnic in Kharkov. He has been selected for the most classified assignment in the Soviet military. No one told him what it was. His family was told he was being assigned to a communications unit in Siberia. He couldn't say where. He couldn't call, couldn't write letters with return addresses. His girlfriend received a form letter explaining that he was temporarily unavailable. That was the last she heard for 3 years. The second thing they did was teach him to act. For 2 months, Dmitry learned how to be a railway worker. He memorized train schedules. He learned the slang that conductors used. He practiced walking like a civilian, no military posture, no crisp movements. He was issued 3 uniforms. One was his military uniform, which he would never wear outside the train. The second was a railway engineer's coverall. The third was civilian clothes, a shabby coat, a wool cap, cigarettes in the pocket. If the train stopped at a civilian station and Dmitry needed to step onto the platform, he had to look like a bored freight worker stretching his legs, not like a nuclear weapons officer. He was then introduced to his home for the next 3 years. From the outside, a freight train, green livery, Cyrillic markings, nothing special. From the inside, a spacecraft. The locomotive was a triple-headed diesel-electric monster, generating enough power to pull 400 tons through Siberian snowdrifts. Behind that, the command car, computers, encrypted satellite links. To launch consoles, requiring 2 officers with 2 keys to initiate the sequence. The button wasn't a button, it was a procedure. Behind that, the missile cars, 3 of them carrying 3 RT-23s, 30 nuclear warheads ready to fly. And behind that, the living quarters. Dmitry's room was a bunk 6 feet long and 2 feet wide, stacked 3 high. 70 men shared a space designed for 20. There were no windows. The windows visible from outside were painted steel plates or one-way glass that looked like curtains. The crew lived in a sealed tube. The air was recycled, the food was canned, the only entertainment was books, chess, and a single television that received state broadcasts when the antenna could find a signal. Missions lasted 21 days. 3 weeks of slow, continuous movement across the Urals, through the Siberian forest, never stopping for more than a few hours, never following the same route twice. Dmitry learned to sleep through the rocking. He learned to read by flashlight. He learned to ignore the fact that his bunk was 15 feet from a thermonuclear warhead. He learned to wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Most days nothing happened. The train rolled. The cooks made borscht. The officers played cards. The missile sat in its tube, cold and patient. Then the alarm would sound. Green light, launch drill. The train would brake hard. The stabilizers would deploy, biting into the frozen ground. Dmitry would run to his station, his heart pounding. In the command car, the 2 senior officers would insert their keys. They would enter the codes. They would wait for confirmation from Moscow. And for those 2 minutes, Dmitry didn't know if it was real. He didn't know if the world was ending. He would stand at his console, hands shaking, watching the status lights blink, thinking about his mother, his girlfriend. The city of Washington, which he had never seen but had studied in target briefings. Then the cancel order would come, or the drill would end. The alarm would stop. Stabilizers would retract. The train would start moving again. Dmitry would go back to his bunk. He would stare at the ceiling. He would do this 2 or 3 times a week. For 3 years. Years later, in an interview after the Soviet collapse, a former BZhRK officer described the experience. "We were monks," he said. "Monks with a vow of silence, living in a moving monastery, praying that we would never have to use our prayers. They called themselves the Grooms, Grooms of the Apocalypse. They tended the weapon, they kept it ready. They hoped they would never have to let it ride. While the Grooms waited in silence, the Americans were losing their minds." The first confirmed sighting of the BZhRK came in 1984. A satellite photograph showed an unusual train configuration near a known missile production facility. The CIA analysts stared at the image for weeks. It looked like a freight train, but the wheel arrangement was wrong. Too many axles. The weight distribution suggested something massive hidden inside. They gave it a code name, SS-24 Scalpel. And then they tried to find it. They failed. The problem was math. A satellite photograph is a snapshot, one moment frozen in time. By the time the image was downloaded, transmitted to Langley, developed, and analyzed, 8 hours had passed. In 8 hours, a train can travel 500 miles. The ghost train could be anywhere within a circle covering 800,000 square kilometers. And there were thousands of trains moving through that circle. Which one was the weapon? The Soviets knew the satellite schedules and knew exactly when the keyhole passed overhead. When the satellite was watching, the ghost train behaved like any other freight train, slow, predictable, parked in sidings. The moment the satellite dipped below the horizon, the ghost train sprinted. It would vanish into a tunnel and not emerge for 12 hours. Which tunnel? The Soviets had thousands. It would pull into a covered rail yard and aircraft hangar for trains and disappear. When the satellite came back, it saw a roof. It didn't know if the train was inside or if it had left 6 hours ago through a different exit. The Americans tried everything. Thermal imaging. Nuclear warheads generate heat. Diesel engines generate heat. Maybe they could spot the train by its temperature signature. The Soviets installed refrigeration units. They cooled the cars to match the ambient temperature outside. In winter, the missile cars were as cold as the snow. Cold-blooded. Signals intelligence. Maybe they could intercept the radio communications between the train and Moscow. The Soviets used burst transmissions, encrypted messages compressed into milliseconds. Blink, and you'd miss it. And the train maintained radio silence for days at a time, communicating only through pre-arranged codes. Human intelligence. Maybe they could recruit spies, train spotters to watch the rail yards and report unusual configurations. The Soviets anticipated this. They started attaching extra wheel bogies to regular freight trains, heavy machinery transports, coal cars, random decoys. Suddenly, every heavy train in Russia looked like a suspect. The Pentagon ran the numbers. To guarantee the destruction of the ghost trains, they would have to launch thousands of warheads. They would have to carpet bomb the entire Soviet rail network. Every junction, every tunnel, every switching yard. Even then, some trains would survive, hidden in the forest, waiting. It was an impossible target. The ghost train had achieved its purpose. It was the ultimate deterrent. But because it was powerful, but because it was invisible. Can't shoot what you can't see. The Americans were so terrified of this concept that they tried to copy it. In 1986, the Reagan administration proposed the Peacekeeper Rail Garrison. The plan was simple. Put the MX Peacekeeper missile on trains and run them through the American Midwest. The public reaction was immediate and negative. People in Nebraska didn't want nuclear warheads rolling past their farms. People in Kansas didn't want missiles parked next to their schools. Protesters blocked the tracks. Congressmen received angry letters. The plan was debated, delayed, and eventually canceled. The Soviets didn't have this problem. They didn't need public approval. They just built the trains. By 1991, 12 ghost trains were operational, 36 missiles, 360 warheads, roaming the darkness of Siberia, waiting for a war that never came. December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. The red flag came down. The republics declared independence. The economy collapsed, and the ghost trains became orphans. The BZhRK was an expensive weapon. The specialized cars needed constant maintenance. The tracks they used wore out faster than normal. Crews required years of training. The new Russian Federation was broke, could barely pay its soldiers. It couldn't afford the ghosts. But money wasn't the only problem. The Americans wanted the trains dead. During the start to arms reduction negotiations, the U.S. delegation made the railmobile missiles a top priority. They feared them more than the submarines, more than the silos. They demanded their destruction. Russia, desperate for Western loans, desperate for international legitimacy. The trains were scheduled for elimination. Between 2003 and 2007, the ghost trains came home to die. One by one, they were recalled to their bases. The missiles were removed carefully, slowly, with American inspectors watching. The RT-23s were drained of fuel and disassembled. Warheads were shipped to dismantlement facilities. Specialized launch cars, those engineering marvels with their articulated joints and hydraulic systems, were cut apart with welding torches. Scrap metal. The locomotives were repainted and returned to civilian service. Some of them are probably still running today, pulling freight through the Urals, unaware of what they used to carry. And the crews, the Grooms, were reassigned, or retired, or simply forgotten. The most dangerous vehicles in human history were turned into razor blades and soup cans. The Americans watched every cut. They verified every missile's destruction, so they were thorough. But they made one mistake. They destroyed the trains. They didn't destroy the idea. 2013, the Kremlin announces a new project. Codename Barguzin. A new nuclear train. The details are scarce. Classified, but what leaked out was enough to make the Pentagon nervous. The Barguzin would be lighter than the old BZhRK. It would carry the RS-24 missile smaller. It's more modern, harder to intercept. It wouldn't need special reinforced tracks. It could run on any standard rail line. It would look even more like an ordinary freight train. Improved camouflage. It's better thermal shielding. Updated electronics. The ghost was coming back. In 2017, Russian officials announced that the Barguzin project had been frozen due to budget constraints. Western analysts exhaled. But other sources tell a different story. The project wasn't canceled. It was hidden, moved to a lower classification level, continued in secret. The Russian railway network is still there. 87,000 miles. Tunnels are still there. The covered rail yards, the forests. Somewhere perhaps in a closed factory in the Urals. Perhaps in a design bureau that officially doesn't exist. The blueprints for the ghost train are sitting in a safe, waiting for the order. We like to imagine nuclear weapons as silos, big concrete bunkers, barbed wire fences, warning signs and armed guards. Things we can see, things we can map, things we can count in treaties and verify with satellites. But the lesson of the BZhRK is darker. The most dangerous weapons are the ones that look ordinary. The Soviet engineers didn't just build a missile. They weaponized the mundane, turned the background of daily life into a delivery system for the apocalypse. A train, a symbol of travel, of commerce, of connection. Transformed into a symbol of absolute destruction. So, the next time you're waiting at a railway crossing, watching a long freight train rumble past, refrigerator cars, tankers, covered wagons with faded paint, take a closer look. Look at the wheels, count the axles, look at the roof, check for seams that shouldn't be there. Ask yourself, do you really know what's inside? Thanks for watching this episode of ShadowWorks. The story of the nuclear train is a masterclass in asymmetric thinking, solving a problem not with more power, but with better deception. If you enjoyed this journey into the frozen secrets of the Cold War, hit that subscribe button. We have a lot more files to declassify. Let me know in the comments. If you were in charge of hiding a nuclear weapon, where would you put it? A train? Cargo ship? A convoy of ordinary trucks? Until next time, keep your eyes on the tracks.